This video was paid for by the Lunar Toy Store. Thanks, man. Hey, my name is Jobby, and I spent way too much money on this. Check out this figure's unboxing video to get some more backstory of how I came to this terrible financial decision. But was it really a terrible financial decision? Well, let me just start off by saying that I'm not the biggest Power Rangers fan. I mean, I did grow up with it, but I wasn't a fan of the Power Rangers themselves. They were basically high school cardboard cutouts that turned into Super Sentai characters. But my favorite segment of the Power Rangers was definitely when the Zords would come in, combine into the Megazord, and let's just say it never failed to make my monster grow. But I never dared to ask my parents for a Megazord toy. After all, my parents weren't the wealthiest people, and I always felt that I didn't deserve it. Wow, even when I was young, I had crippling self-doubt. Cut to over 20 years later, and I still live with my parents. But my money is my own, and now I can afford all the toys that I wanted and would have wanted when I was a child, even though I should be saving up to move out of my dad's basement, and this is getting a bit too real. But before we get into the review proper, let's take a look at what we're gonna look at. So we got the Pterodactyl dinosaur, the Saber-Toothed Tiger dinosaur, the Triceratops, the Mastodon, and the Tyrannosaurus. And I think the T-Rex Zord is a good place to start, because the painting and the sculpting on this figure is amazing. I mean, sure, the figure does look kinda cheap at first glance, but this was done intentionally to honor the original toy and the TV show. All of the details that were stickers on the original toy, to my knowledge, are now precisely sculpted and cleanly painted. The figure looks like the original toy, but feels like a high-quality art piece. And another thing that I love is the heft of the figure. And that's of course due to a lot of die-cast metal. Using my cold touch technique, I've determined that a lot of the torso is die-cast, this chest piece, these joints in the legs, and I could be missing some parts. I mean, the cold touch technique doesn't exactly work in this terrible LA weather. Fuck, I wanna die. But as much as I want the figure to be perfect, it's not. Now, my first complaint is not a critique on the figure itself, but this isn't the best looking T-Rex. The arms are too long, the legs are too luscious, and the posture is a bit unsettling. But you could kind of fix that by rotating his legs and standing him up a little more horizontally. It's easier than it sounds. Unfortunately, the hinge joint at the ankle is a bit too loose to carry the die-cast body. So even though this looks better, he'll always end up in his original posture, a little too upright with the tail resting on the ground. And the tail has a hinge joint that is annoyingly spring-loaded, and another hinge joint. And my biggest issue with this figure, he's got no head swivel. Now, complaining about a Power Rangers toy's articulation is like complaining about the posability of a rock. I'm aware that the older toys were just glorified bricks, but it's clear to me that the solo Chogokin version is going for something a little more articulated. I mean, after all, he's got ball joints in the shoulders that allows him to rotate, moves out that far, bend at the elbow, hinge joint at the hand, the claws open, a waist swivel, rotation at the leg, beautiful spread, a seemingly great thigh swivel that I feel is a bit too loose to handle his combined form. Spoilers? I was completely right. Slight bend at the knee, and of course, so the figure is actually quite posable, which is why it's such a shame that there's no swivel at the head, but at least the head can move up and down, and the mouth can open to reveal a pair of cannons. But it almost feels futile to complain about this figure's articulation, because the Mastodon is pretty much a paperweight, but it's a paperweight that has amazing painting and sculpting. Something that stood out to me is that most of the body has this glossy finish that you will get dirty with your fingerprints, just accept it, but the head has a more satin finish. It's not as reflective. And at first I took issue with that, but when you consider what the head becomes, it's not bad at all. And something else about the figure that's far from bad is the weight. I think it might even be heavier than the T-Rex. Die-cast in all of his legs and die-cast in the shoulders. It's just a shame that his front legs can't move at all, but his back legs can move back and forward, his head can move up and down, and his trunk has a hinge joint. Now I understand why this particular Zord doesn't have a lot of articulation. I mean, it does play into the transformation, but front leg movement would have been nice. So calling the Zord a paperweight is a bit of an exaggeration. He does have some posability, but the Triceratops Zord fits the description a bit more. I mean, he doesn't even have legs, and I'm not gonna lie, I was a bit disappointed. I forgot that the Triceratops Zord was basically a tank with a face, and honestly, this design is kinda lazy, but at least the painting and sculpting is amazing. And like all the other Zords so far, this guy also has a lot of heft, even though the only diecast part I could pick out is this whole silver area. Now, you would think this guy is completely solid because he doesn't have legs to flop around, but no. Would have been nice if these sections clipped out, but as it is now, they don't want to stay out at all. So hold it by its sides at your own discretion. But if you don't hold it by its side, yeah, it's pretty solid. But what the hell is that sound? Luckily, nothing is broken. It's just that the horns can actually extend to reveal some chains. Very cool feature, but you're barely gonna use it. Unless you use a Bandai Tamashii 510, and that doesn't look bad at all. Now, the chains aren't spring-loaded, so getting it back into his head is a bit of a challenge, but not that hard once you get the hang of it. Now, surprisingly for something without legs, the figure has a ball joint at the head. every ball joint can and will be a swivel. Mouth can open. The head ratchets up and down. This whole section can pivot side to side. These aren't working treads, which suck, but what sucks even more is that there's no wheels, so it can't roll around at all. Tail moves up and down, and the cannon at the end of his tail can move around also. And while we're on the subject of legs, let's take a look at the other leg, the Saber-Toothed Tiger. I shouldn't even have to say it at this point, but the painting is going to admit, but the Saber-Toothed Tiger has got to be my favorite out of the set. It just looks the most proportionate and is incredibly fun to handle. Not to mention it's a stinky yellow like me. Of course, this thing also has die-cast parts, specifically this whole area minus the head. Now, the head doesn't look like a tiger at all, but it does look great. It's just too bad that the teeth are not die-cast metal, but that's not a big deal. I mean, you could still cut yourself if you try hard enough. And there's a ball joint at the head. The neck can move up and down. Rotation at the front legs, and those ratchets are just delicious. Bend at the elbow, up and down at the paw. This whole section can move side to side and up and down. Back legs can move forward and backward, up and down at the tail. And you could even get it up in the air if you have two Bandai Tamashii. That looks fantastic. And going from my favorite, we go to my least favorite. The painting of the sculpting on the Pterodactyl is amazing, but it's amazing in the sense that it captures how stupid the original was. It's just so obvious that this thing is a chest. And for being the Zord of the Pink Ranger, there's barely any pink on it at all. Of course, these are all complaints about the design and not the figure, but the figure itself does feel nice. I mean, the silver part is die-cast metal, so it does have a bit of heft. But it looks so stupid. To make it look a little less stupid, you can take off its leg and store him for the T-Rex for safekeeping. Get a flip it on, and that doesn't look too bad. I'd even go so far as to say, it looks fucking awesome. This thing was meant to be up in the air, and it's kind of disappointing that some kind of flight stand wasn't included. As for posability, you get a that was a chicken sound, by the way, not a dying cat. The wings can flap, and that's it. Just be careful when handling these figures. Since this is not a kid's toy, Bandai was not afraid to make some parts shit. So each of these Zords are actually a good size, and the biggest one is the T-Rex. Here's Figma Madoka Academy, SH Monster Arch Godzilla, and Masterpiece Optimus Prime. As for the Mastodon, Madoka Godzilla Prime, Triceratops, Madoka Godzilla Prime, Saber-Toothed Tiger, Madoka Godzilla Prime, and the Pterodactyl. All of the Zords have their good and bad points, but they do still feel like smaller parts of a larger whole instead of individual figures. But that's because they are smaller parts of a whole, and we're gonna talk about one of those wholes right now. Here we have the Dino Tanker, otherwise known as the boy boutta do it. Calling this thing a tank is a bit of a stretch, more like a giant robot orgy. An orgy with a decapitation, that's always fun. But as much of a mess as it is, I can't help but love it. I mean, this mode did appear in the show, and this figure does a great job at capturing the silliness of that idea. But this mode is more of a cool feature than a display piece. I don't think you'll show off this set in this mode unless you have two more sets, so you can have the individual Zords, this mode, and the Megazord, but at that point, you're just fucking insane. As for posability, forget about it. You can't even hold this thing without it flopping around. It doesn't even have actual wheels, so you can't even roll it around to get some more playability. I mean, you do get that, but that's more for the Megazord. So this thing is silly, cool looking, but not much fun to play with. But I will give it this. This thing has some presence. Here's Madoka Godzilla Prime and the soul of Chogokin. Let's save it for the actual combination. So the Dino Tanker is not what you came here for, but you can't deny that this mode has some kind of charm. Now, due to my fear of the copyright boogeyman, I dare not use the Power Rangers theme for an extended period of time, but in my defense, I didn't even scream my head off in the Gao Gai Gar review. Who gives a fuck? Let's get into the good shit. And finally, we have the Megazord, also known as Daizyujin if you're a fucking slant. But I gotta be completely honest with you, the Megazord looks This thing is a work of art, and it pulls it off without deviating too much from the original design. I'm just glad he doesn't look like a guy in a suit. Compared to a lot of the modern Power Rangers / Super Sentai mechas, there was something so elegant about Daijujin. You could barely tell that the torso was made from several robots. The Mastodon is completely lost, the T-Rex is somewhat there but still very cohesive, and the Pterodactyl, what pterodactyl? The non-combiner aesthetic is very refreshing compared to all the nonsense of the modern era. That is, of course, until you get to the legs. This is obviously a Triceratops and a Saber-Toothed Tiger, but this is the only real indication that the Megazord is even a combining robot, and I don't know about you, but I love his animal boots. Now, the Megazord can't look absolutely complete without his famous weapons. First of all, you get the Power Sword that plugs right into his hand, and you get the Mastodon Shield that also plugs right into his hand, but not very solidly. Big problem when you're trying to get him into some action poses, it could get really weird. And the Power Sword, which pretty much comes out of nowhere and can't be stored anywhere, is a beautiful piece of plastic, which in itself is quite disappointing. Looks cool though, and that's all that matters, right? No. The Megazord is kind of a chunky bastard, and I love the weight of this figure, but actually handling the figure is where my love starts to fade. I'm very sad to say that this figure is not the most solid, but I might be exaggerating a little bit. It's not completely terrible to handle, but there's just some areas that fuck off. $275. $275, and the arms don't even snap in. It seems like such a basic design oversight. I mean, I guess you can call it another elbow joint, but no, that's terrible. However, the loose thigh swivels are a bit more forgivable. I understand that the lower legs have a substantial amount of die cast in them, so it's bound to weigh down at the thigh at one point or another. Annoying, but understandable. What the fuck is the arms excuse? And I know what some of you Power Rangers fans are thinking. Why the are you even complaining, you goddamn ingrate? The fact that a giant Megazord, a line of toys infamous for their lack of swivels, even has this is a godsend. And I gotta agree with you, it is pretty amazing. But because I couldn't afford to grow up with the Megazords when I was a kid, I'm not judging this figure as a Power Rangers fan, and I'm judging it as a Soul of Chogokin figure. I mean, my other beautiful baby boy kinda set a standard for me when it comes to the Soul of Chogokin line, and the Gao-Gai-Gar had a beautiful ball joint at the head, so why the fuck does this figure just have a head swivel? Look, you know me, I'm not one to complain about swivels, but when another toy in the same toy line that's older has a ball joint at the head, it just seems like a big step backwards. Next, you'll be telling me women are banned from driving. At least he's got a beautiful ratcheting shoulder, arm moves out, bicep swivel, bend at the elbow, limited ball joint at the wrist that is pretty much a swivel. The wrist can shift a little bit, ball joint at the thumb, hinge joint at the fingers, and each of these fingers are actually separate parts. It's just too bad that there's no hinge joint at the knuckles, so he can't really flip you off. And I was almost disappointed by the lack of a waist swivel, but if you just snap off this tail here, there you go. Rotation at the leg, can't move back at all. Side skirts move out. Previously mentioned loose thigh swivel, but the T-Rex feet do get in the way of that. But if you utilize his beautiful spread, swivels are a lot more free. You could even bend this joint to free up the swivel even more. Bend at the knee, that is disappointingly shallow. Up and down at the ankle, a pretty cool pivot. And the ball joint at the Triceratops head can act as an even deeper pivot. The Saber-Toothed Tiger doesn't work as well. To be fair, the posability on this guy isn't terrible. It's pretty much got the same amount as the Gao-Gai-Gar. But the Gao-Gai-Gar had a ball joint at the head and individual articulated fingers, which sounds like a minor complaint, but to me, it's a huge step back. But what the figure lacks in posability, it more than makes up for in size. Here's Figma Monogatari, SH Monster Arts Godzilla, Masterpiece Optimus Prime, and the superior Soul of Chogokin figure, the GX-68 Gao-Gai-Gar. Now keep in mind, this is GX-72. What happened between that? Now, despite the issues I have with the feel of the figure and the posability, I still gotta say that as a set of 5 figures that combine into a giant robot, yeah, this thing is pretty awesome. So I won't go so far as to give this thing just a hug, but I can't go as far as to give this thing the triple kiss, which to me is the greatest disappointment of all. I expect greatness when I buy a Soul of Chogokin figure, and unfortunately this guy didn't blow my mind, especially for the price I paid for it. The fuck outta here. Compared to most retailers though, $275 is a steal, which sucks. I almost feel unworthy of this figure. If I was a bigger Power Rangers fan and had more sentimental value attached to the franchise, I know that I would absolutely love this thing, but I can't say that I completely regret my purchase. I mean, the only reason I bought it in the first place is that I'm super into giant robots, especially transforming or combining ones. But $275, it's a bit much. But luckily for me, I had a little help from the Luna Toy Store! Everyone's best friend, the Luna Toy Store, actually took mercy upon me and helped me pay for the cost of the figure. They paid me $100, so essentially I only spent $175 on the figure, which is a lot more reasonable for me. If that doesn't show it's real between us, I don't know what does. Go check them out for me, please. And to my knowledge, they don't have the Soul of Chogokin Megazord in stock, but they do have a smaller and cheaper and probably more posable alternative. The fact that they're making new Mini-Pla based on the original Megazord design has got me all kinds of hot and bothered. And speaking of hot and bothered, fuck California! I'm sweating like shit in my closet, and that's probably why I sound overly bitchy. Because I actually don't hate the figure, I just kinda hate myself right now. But what can I do? Lie about my opinion for the sake of butthurt tokusatsu fans? Fuck no. I love the idea of this figure, and I even loved the build up to it. But now, with it in my hands, it's just not the same anymore. When peace and happiness feels like fantasy, close your eyes and start remembering me. When you're in my arms, there's nothing to fear. Isn't that what you'd wanna hear? The truth, I'm sad to say, is love has dispersed over rocks and valleys, gone with the wind. It may not be clear, but you're no longer here. Now it's done before it begins. And the summer days, they fade away like a withering memory. And in your place, there's an empty space in me.
Forgive me.